Welcome back to Success on the Spectrum, the podcast. The girls here as per usual. We're just going to jump right into it today because we've stacked this one a little bit. I know you're sick of hearing it. Hit the little bell on the bottom, like, share, follow, rinse, and repeat. But the first thing that we're going to talk about in our support system segment is going to be public schooling and the support systems that are put in place for neurodivergence currently. And we're gonna start with kind of sharing a little bit from each of us on what our school experience was like. What I'd like to do is I'd like to end with the positive, so I'll go last because mine wasn't that bad. I'd say we probably Shay, if you want to get us started, because I know you had some stuff.
Yeah, I had a lot of stuff. I hated school.
Spill the tea.
Yeah, so something that I realized when I was taking notes about what I was going to talk about today in this section was that I still felt embarrassed to put it out into the world. And I'm 31 years old. And I was like, wow, I'm still kind of carrying this with me. And so, yeah, in my school, I will say this too, because I think it's an important part. I went to school in Kansas in the country. The population of the entire town was 650 people. We did not have a stoplight. We had 2 gas stations and a grocery store, and that is it. Everything else was farmland. And so, just in general, we were not like a heavily funded school. But one of my experience in elementary school was I was diagnosed in 2nd grade with ADHD, and I just took medicine and went to school, and my parents were like, we should be good to go now. And that was not at all a solution. And so 2nd and 3rd grade, I continued to have crappy grades and run around and distract people. And, I was still having a lot of symptoms from my ADHD. And so in 4th grade, I was asked to come to the teacher's desk. I think, 2nd or 3rd day of school that year. And I was told that I was going to be in a program called Specials. Number one, that name is ridiculous.
Not a great name.
Not a good name. It's ridiculous. And shame on you for naming it that. Blank elementary school. And you did not have a choice. And all of your peers around you knew why you were leaving every single day. So everyone who was selected for specials at a certain point in the day, every day, it was like, okay, specials kids, it's your time to go. And so we all collectively would stand up with our heads down and shamefully walk out of the room, where we would go to a smaller classroom and learn together. And everyone else, when, you're 8 years old, everyone else who was smart and normal and capable got to stay in the classroom with their friends. And so, when I was talking to Lindsay about this on Wednesday, she said the word humiliating. And I cannot think of a better word to describe that experience. It was humiliating. And it's alienating. It was very much, Brittany brought up, it was separating the X's and the O's. And in front of everyone, it was humiliating. And I just think, I didn't want to come and talk about, complain about the situation and be like, hey, that really sucked. And it still sucks now. But what I wanted to do is talk about a solution. And if you didn't know, I went to college to be a teacher, and I dropped out of college because I realized that I could not make a difference in the public school system, because you are given a box and you stay in that box and you do not leave that box, or you will lose your job. And so I realized that was not the place I was going to get to go to make a difference. But I would have wanted to explain to my classroom that not everybody learns the same, explain that people are unique and they're different, and every single person on the planet has a different brain than the person to the right and the left of them. And I would wanted to talk about that diversity, and I would have wanted to create a classroom where everyone was comfortable in asking questions and you know, saying, hey, I before you move on, I actually didn't understand what you just said. And we could have this conducive space to learn, and this understanding that everybody is amazing and everybody is perfect just the way they are. Some people just don't learn at the same pace or rate. And I think, you know, maybe that's just me being too hopeful, but I just think that would be such a beautiful addition to, you know, classroom education these days. So, but yeah, it was, you know, last thing on this, and I'll wrap it up is, and I'm going to talk about this aspect a lot in all of these episodes, is the low self-esteem that comes with having ADHD. ADHD people receive 20,000 more negative comments and critiques in their lifetime than a neurotypical person. Many of those happening in the very early ages of your life, when you are supposed to feel like you matter, and it's your very first time ever living life, and you're just a little kid, and people are constantly on your ass because your brain doesn't work like theirs, and no one is teaching you how your brain works, and you just think that you're different, and that bounces back into very, very low self-esteem. And so to be asked to stand up and go to your dumb kid corner so everyone else can move along feels like shit.
Yeah.
And I think we need to change that. We need to change that. We already have low self-esteem. We already feel different. We already feel like shit about ourselves. I just wanted to be included in the classroom with my friends. I just wanted to feel like I was normal, you know?
And I here's the thing that I'm going to tell you. I don't think it would be that hard to change. I think it's very simple. I think you give kindergartners a simple cognitive function and learning test that will show you what tools they work best with learning, and you don't teach kids. That's the thing, is we're teaching them how to learn one way. We're teaching them how basically to become a 9 to 5 employee and fit inside the social boxes and learn how to memorize and recite, right? That's what we're teaching generally. And I think if you instead taught kids that there are multiple ways to learn, and then you test them early for the tools that they need and just make the tools available, you have substantially less seclusion, substantially less.
I think it also comes down to two things, which is incentives and funding. And some of that we'll talk about later today. Some of that is its own separate category. The funding we'll have to touch on another time, but I think it really comes down to that also, because I feel like a lot of teachers agree with everything that you guys are saying. And teachers, for the most part, are people like you, Shay, who thought it would be something they would be really good at, that they could connect and that they could make a difference.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about cops. I feel the same way about military. I feel the same way about anybody who works in a generally, like, you know, in within like a basic fundamental societal infrastructure, you know, and it comes down to incentives and funding.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, my teacher in 4th grade, his name was Mr. Mayer. I still think about him to this day. Such a kind person. He was just doing what he was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Not his fault at all. You're absolutely right. And you know what? My grades reflected that I needed extra help.
Yeah.
So, you know, I understand, but from the child's perspective,
Totally.
not the best solution. Yeah, it
Yeah.
needs to
So
be
it's like, how
revised.
do we change the incentives and the funding so that those teachers can make the difference? Because
Yeah,
the cognitive
absolutely.
test is great. And then also, like, what if the teachers had maybe a small basic understanding of the neurodivergent spectrum and things to look out for? Like this kid who's super disruptive, but you think they have a lot of potential, like that's a clue, you know? Like there's so many different clues, and I feel like teachers, they pick up on that.
Well, and
The
it's
really
funny.
quiet, organized girl in the back of the room
Yeah.
might have a touch of the tism.
Yeah.
It's funny looking back on it, because I was put in so many situations like you were in, Shay, like legit humiliation. Just, you know, even from looking back on it, it's like, how did they ever think this was going to be productive? And luckily at the time, my mom was like, my mom was almost like the rebel mom because she was like career woman, like wasn't a part of the PTA. Yep. So like, and I always got to hear what she would say. She's like, why does Betsy on the PTA think that I really care about like what she thinks? Like, I really don't have time for like, sorry, I don't have time to bake cookies for like the bake sale, but like I have like a full career that I have to fly across, you know, the United States to do. So I would hear my mom like react to the way that they were treating me. And there were moments where she would like stand up for me and be like, no, this is not okay. Like, you made my kid do what? Like, what in what world would you think that's okay? So I would see my mom react that way. So then I would start questioning, like, this is just like a power trip. Like, this is like, you know, like what this is also like you're saying, like the funding, it's all political at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are they trying to prove? I don't know. But it's like it's just it's not a productive way for anyone to learn is to be in a situation where everyone's just eyes on you, you know?
I think I'm grateful for the outpour of information too, around these diagnoses, because, you know, I called my mom and I was like, what was your experience with me as a child with after my diagnosis? And she was like, I mean, we literally thought that the medicine was the fix all. And you just continue to have really low self-esteem. You continue to have bad grades. And like, so this is just like a shout out to the parents. Like it sounds like Morgan's mom, and how Lindsay is with her children, is standing up for your child if they are neurodivergent. My mom admitted to me 2 days ago that my dad and her did not do any further in education on my diagnosis. They had no idea what it was. And so everyone was like, why aren't you better yet? Why are you still acting like this? And I'm like, you guys don't know, like, everyone thinks it's you're just like the hyper kid in the classroom, and you don't understand all the other things that go into it. So if you happen to be a parent who is listening into this because your child is neurodivergent, I encourage you, please, to study every little ounce of their diagnosis, because it is so much more than what meets the eye. And when you are a child and you've only been walking around the earth figuring out how to live for a few years, you have no idea how to handle this situation and the brain that lives inside of your body. We look at the adult to help us figure this out. And so if you are a parent, with love and kindness, please go to your child and help them learn how their brain works. It will change everything. It will change the path of their life if someone will meet them with love, kindness, and understanding of how their brain works. It will change everything.
And it's so crazy too, because I am 33 going on 34. I didn't really understand my brain and start trying to understand my brain until maybe 2, 3 years ago ish, you know, and like really in the past year and a half. And that's only because of like where my life has taken me and the goals I have, the responsibilities that I have, like, you know, those are the things that are now the catalyst of me trying to figure out what what is this situation, you know what I mean? Like, how do I work with this best? And like, that's in my 30s, you know. If this was a conversation that we could have had it as when we were kids, elementary school, there's so many things that are falling into place for me now, and it's because I have awesome friends who are going through the same thing, and we just so happen to like have the conversation with each other. And so I'm so grateful for that. But thank you for that message, Shay. I think that's like really important.
Yeah.
So I sit in a different position right now on two things. So I'll start with my schooling and then with the choices I'm making as a mother. I was not individualized or singled out for having issues. I was put into the GATE program, which is gifted and talented education. What that means is that I was above and beyond the curriculum that they were approved to give me. So they would pull me out of class to go do other projects. And I realize now, looking back on it, like that really was just silly busy work. And they would put us, like they would almost put us to do like labor jobs for the school. Like they've already done their classwork, let's give them other work to do.
Like
And
what?
it was literally like a little mini day work camp for us, because we're done with all of this, like, and so we're just sitting in classroom making disruptions and all the things.
The more we talk about it, the more creepy it sounds.
Yeah, right, because they don't know what to do with the people that they're not, it's all of these teachers, right? Most of them, I would say, have really good intentions. However, they don't know what they don't know. And when they go to school, like if you look at the amount of like early childhood education that actually sits in the realm of psychology and those like sorts of things, the amount of schooling that they actually receive on that is not very much. And I'm now, as a parent, sitting in a space where I know that one of my children has ADHD, and at least one of my children for certain has autism. Um, my 19-year-old probably also has a touch of autism because he's pre-med neuroscience and graduated a year ahead of his classmate, like in college credits. So I don't, maybe him too, but my daughter specifically, they put her into the GATE program. Is a little different here. I got pretty involved to look at like what the specifics were, and it's more into like robotics and engineering and stuff here, but they have a very good school. The thing that I'm not willing to do, though, at this point in time, is actually get her diagnosed. And this is something I'm going to tell any of the parents out there to consider if they are high masking, high functioning, you know, if they don't need internal like daily support systems, create the support systems yourself. You have to get very hands-on in the schooling, in the parenting, which is what I've done. I often will have to pull extra things for her to work on. She's got like at home multiple, because she, in a homeschooling route, she's done with all of her schooling in an hour and a half. And so what I'm doing with her right now, in navigating the current public school system, is that I am taking it upon myself to find her the extra brain work areas, extra places where she actually feels like she's getting fulfilled, because the opposite side of not feeling like you're able to keep up with everybody is feeling like you're completely alienated, because all of these kids that have been stuck doing this work for the last 3 hours in the classroom, and you're like, there's two different ways to be alienated, I think. You know, and I'm trying to refrain from my children getting put in, while I know that labels are important, I'm trying to refrain from them getting labeled too early. Only because I want them to learn how to navigate this world with their particular things, without having to hope that the school system is going to do what we hope it's going to do.
Yeah. I mean, because that's the
really
whole point of labeling, isn't it? Is to like find them the right support. So if you're already providing that support, and I mean, I know your kids, like they're younger, you know, it's like if you have all of the support that you need and you feel seen and you feel heard and you feel safe and you feel confident, like you don't need the rest of the stuff. The whole point is that getting that result, you know? So if you're already providing that result, then it's like, let them go through life. Like all the hard conversations that they need to have, you can have as many of those conversations with them as possible and then eventually outsource the rest. But like as a parent, if you're able to be that person.
I just don't want them to be secluded on
Yeah, and
either
I
end
really
of
do.
that spectrum.
I think that that's so. I think that I'm not a mother, so I can't relate to that directly, but I feel like that you will get labeled and you will get put into a certain box, and it will limit, like you'll have those impressions so early that's like, oh, well, I am this way, so I can't maybe do this. Or I am this way, so I can't maybe do that, instead of maybe
Very limiting.
using it as a superpower.
Yeah, and there's an interesting thing. So 13 to 15% is the amount of school age students currently, that are being newly diagnosed year over year in the American school system. So year over year for every grade, there's an increase of 13 to 15% of children that are in the neurodivergence realm. So autism, ADHD, dyslexia, OCD, all of those are in that spectrum, as we know. Here's the shocking bit that we'll wrap this section on. 13 to 15% new kids every year over year, per grade on average, because people are getting more diagnosed now and we've got more access to information, right? The amount of the percentage of increase in funding over the last 4 years post-COVID for the average American school, when 13 to 15% of its new students, the average increase in funding for these types of programs is less than 2%.
Woo! I'm not surprised at all.
Less than 2%. Now
Vegas is probably even worse.
Yeah.
Texas is about to. Texas is on the could possibly lose its support systems for neurodivergence. So
entirely, yeah. Which we'll talk about that at a later time, but
yeah, I do. I think we should definitely take a deep dive into like school funding at some point. That would be its own podcast. But yeah, that's a good conversation to have. Absolutely.
So here's the last thing that I'm gonna give you on this. Of the 13 to 15% of new students that are getting that are being pushed into these same programs that have always existed. Like they're not increasing the funding, so the programs stay the same, correct? And all of these programs, every single one of them so far that I have like come across in my research that any of us have experienced are all based in seclusion. And we'll get into a little bit of this towards the end of the show, but here's the worst part of it for me. As of right now, diagnosed children by the time that they are 18 that have gone through the public schooling system, over 80% of those have subjected themselves to self-harm or have had suicidal threats and or attempts. And I fully believe that the reason that there is such a—
Can you say that again, Lindsay? I'm so sorry. Just repeat that.
Okay.
I'm going to write that down.
Over 80% of children that have been taken part in these seclusion programs for neurodivergency, so for special needs for education, over 80% of those children have had a self-harm or suicide attempt or a legitimate suicide threat by the time they reach 18.
Wow.
So it's obviously not working.
I was one of those.
Well, to be fair, correlation doesn't prove causation. It could be that that's the studied population from which that they got these numbers. However, that is the population of kids who have neurodivergence for the most part, unless they go a long time without being undiagnosed. I'm only going to touch on my part quickly because my focus in school was really my issue of focus in school was not the way my brain worked. I didn't realize until later that had a lot to do with everything, obviously. But I was similar to you, Lindsay. I was not secluded in the sense of like having like a very small room to go to with like not a lot of well for the most part. But I also went to school in the Northwest Chicago suburbs, and like my graduating class of high school was like over 1,000 kids. So I was always in like bigger programs, and it's like one of the top high schools in the nation. So I always had a lot of funding. So my experience was always like I got put into like AP classes or like special whatever programs. And, I was always like super high achieving in school, except for math was challenging for me because
I didn't think you were going to finish that sentence. You said I was always super high achieving.
Yeah, but like, no, I had a similar, that was like similar to Lindsay, that was my experience. And but my school experience was like very hyper focused on like a lot of like depression, lack of any sort of like self-love. But that I feel like that was very like physical focus because I was like super overweight, like even as a young kid. I mean, you guys have probably seen pictures of like little bitty, but yeah, 8 or 10 years old, it really is when I was like already like the fat kid. And so that was like mostly my identity throughout school and all the joys that came with that. So
Hmm.
way my brain worked wasn't really my priority.
Yeah.
So to follow that 80% with a little supportive data for you, according to the CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Survey data summary, the trends report that 18% of adolescents in America by the time they hit 18 that are in the public school system. So 18% is
Of the total school
overall population, 80% for neurodivergence.
Woo!
That is
Holy
So there's a little, that'll stack some data for you in the correlation.
dude. I'm writing all this down because I want to dive way deeper into this.
It's just so bizarre to me too that, and I know again we have to wrap up, but it's so bizarre to me too that all these systems that have been put into place for decades and decades and decades that clearly aren't working, why are we not reevaluating it? Even just like from a funding
Incentives and
perspective,
funding.
it just doesn't make any sense to like
Because the things that make the most sense, like they are not always what's implemented. And it's not always like some big malevolent conspiracy. Sometimes it's just like we don't have the money for all these well-intentioned folks to have the run of things.
Mm-hmm.
Or like that doesn't make us money, or that takes more time and we don't have the time. Like it's usually just one not super malevolent decision made after another, made after another, made after another. Sometimes it is a grand conspiracy, but not always.
you went through between 3 different accents in that one.
But there, you know, I think it's also, I'm like really heavy on this. I think it's also a lack of education. I have no idea what it feels like to be bipolar. Okay. So if I was teaching a child who was bipolar and I knew nothing about it, I would not know how to handle that child. And I might want to just send them out of the room for a couple hours a day as well. So I think educating the educators is also extremely important. Shay is doing this in class because this. Brittany is stemming in class because this. This is why she's doing this. Maybe if I just knelt down at her desk and said, "Hey, you all right? You doing okay? You need a break? You need to go to the bathroom or something? Do you need to go breathe for a second? Or are you doing all right?" So much more effective. And I think that the educators need to be educated, you know?
Yeah. Incentives and funding.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about schooling here in a minute too, when Brittany takes over. But for now, is it just me, or one of our favorite segments? So is it just me, or is it physically rough to be neurodivergent? And so the topic of the topic of conversation on this one is the shocking statistics between neurodivergency and autoimmune issues. So we can show of hands if you want, but every single one of us, I have psoriasis. I know we have some gut issues. We've got eczema issues. We've got all sorts of body health and wellness issues on this call. And well, we'll get into a few of those specifically. What we're talking about is the neuroimmune hypothesis, which is stating that the nervous and immune systems are interconnected and can influence each other's functions. So there's to what you were saying earlier, Morgan. Some of the big keys to this, though, or some of the big things that most people will deal with in this is type 1 diabetes. I screenshotted this, so I'm just going to read directly to everybody. This is a lot of information. In 2016, meta-analysis found a significant association between maternal autoimmunity and their children being born with autism. Where was I going with this? Oh, here we go. So type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, eczema, allergies even can be influenced. And they're saying that it comes down to the cytokines and the dopamine receptors in our brain.
Yeah, I'm allergic to wheat, gluten,
coconut.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Um, Here's an interesting one that I pulled data for myself because I've had psoriasis since the day that I was born, and like nobody else in my family's ever had it. They say that genetically, 1 in 4 children born to somebody with psoriasis will have it. Literally, nobody else in my entire family. And this morning, I came across this statistic that like just made my whole life make sense. Um, Apparently, if you are a female with autism, you are 2 times more likely to have psoriasis.
Oh, wow.
That's so crazy.
Isn't that wild? Because it comes down to the T cells. T
Mm.
cells are the cells that live in your skin that they're basically what make your skin.
Mm.
Yeah. So
And
T
they're
cells
overactive.
with somebody in psoriasis, they're overactive. Yeah. But I think that's why my psoriasis, unlike most people's, can be triggered by
Mm.
not only stress, but like allergens. So, like, instead of me just going into anaphylactic shock and getting my psoriasis will also break out.
Yeah.
Not sleeping enough, poor diet, all of those things between my dopamine centers and my gut, I'm realizing all of that affects my psoriasis.
You know what's really interesting? I am not a scientist, obviously, but the term cytokines is familiar to me. And I believe that it is also a measure of inflammatory responses. And autoimmune disorders also are normally resulted from or linked to like inflammation, bad inflammation, because there's good inflammation as well. And I think the cytokines are a marker of that. So I can dive into that. But it was interesting that you said that, because if you are born that way, then you're already born with like a state of chronic inflammation that is causing a response in your body. And all of those things that you mentioned, that when they're not on track, they make it worse. Those are
Mhm.
also known, inflammation agents.
Like, what would it be like to be one of those girls who just like eats cheeseburgers and like goes out drinking all weekend and like isn't bloated or
They're literal
Yeah.
toothpicks. I'm like, what?
like
I
no
don't
side
know.
effects whatsoever?
Well,
I
and
Like,
another hyperthyroidism is also one that's linked in this list of autoimmune issues.
Hyper
Yeah.
or hypo?
Both
Okay, my mom has
thyroid issues.
hypo and she has ADHD.
Mhm.
So another one that we were talking about and that I have experienced is 46% of women who have ADHD also have PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And I want to say the number of for the percentage of women with autism who have PMDD was a lot higher than 46%, I think. But what PMDD does is it for the for the 5 to 10 days leading up to your period is all the PMS symptoms times 100. It's way, way, way more intense. And I actually started my period yesterday. I'm sitting here with a pillow. I feel absolutely terrible. But because my period or my cramps are so bad. But the 5 to 10 days before my period, I am overwhelmingly exhausted. I cannot focus. I'm very bloated. I have muscle and joint pain. I have headaches. And that's just the physical part. And I would argue that the mental and emotional effects are much more severe. But for the sake of the topic, I'll just keep it to the physical symptoms. But everything hurts. And it's half of my life is spent that way, you know. So you have 5 to 10 days before your period, and then you're bleeding for 5 days, that is
Third of your life.
literally half of your life is spent that way.
I wonder what that link is.
Inflammation. I
Well,
think
inflammation and
dopamine
also
receptors.
probably, yeah, well, that's what I was going to say, is also the synaptic pruning you were talking about. If you literally have more like structure to your central nervous system, then everything must be heightened in some sense. I wish, man, if we could get like some doctors or scientists or something on the
Well,
show.
and you already know what I want to bring up because I do so much research on structured water and how it affects
Yeah.
inflammation in the body.
Yeah.
And like legitimately speaking, like I think that like everything stems from all like disease stems from inflammation and dehydration. So
I
it's like
agree.
on top of everything else, it's yeah, anything that's thrown off at all is like can play a role in like the PMDD symptoms because I'll have months where I'm okay-ish, but like I don't think I knew what PMDD was till like in the last probably year.
I didn't until Shay started educating me on it.
Yeah, but like some
I
months I'm
just
like,
thought like why do I only get 10 good days out of the month? Like mentally too, like you were saying, that's the worst part.
mm-hmm.
Well, and they said, so I didn't know I had this either. And then I started talking to my friends. I'm like, oh my God, my luteal phase makes me want to freaking die. And they're like, Shay, one of my friends was like, Shay, you say that every month. I'm just going to say it. We don't have that. We were sitting at lunch and I was like, you guys don't have this? And they were like, no, we don't. And I was like, that that is insane. And so I went down a several month long rabbit hole of like, it wasn't consistent because I don't do anything consistently, but I was constantly looking it up like all the time when I was thinking about it. I was like, what the hell is this? And I found PMDD and I was like, holy shit, that is
Well,
exactly
and even
what this
your
is.
headaches, I mean, like the way you describe, like, because I used to get it really bad when I was younger, like really bad headaches every month. But everyone's just tells you like to suck it up.
Yeah, this is your
Like,
menstrual
yeah,
cycle.
get through
This
it.
is, what
Mm-hmm.
it's like or whatever.
Yeah.
But it says that the ADHD and PMDD have a significant overlap. Number one being hormonal sensitivity. Both ADHD and PMDD are influenced by fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone.
Mm.
Estrogen boosts your dopamine, which ADHD brains already struggle to regulate. When estrogen drops before your period, dopamine levels also drop, making ADHD symptoms significantly worse. Number two
Mm-hmm.
is the emotional dysregulation. Both conditions involve mood instability. Women with ADHD already experience emotional dysregulation, and PMDD intensifies this, leading to extreme irritability, depression, anxiety. Number three is executive functions worsen before your period. So the drop in estrogen and serotonin affects focus, impulse control, motivation, making ADHD symptoms intensify. Number four, and there's only five. Number four is sleep issues. ADHD often comes with poor sleep quality, and PMDD worsens this due to hormone influxes affecting melatonin production. And number five is increased sensitivity to rejection. Many women with ADHD experience rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and PMDD accelerates feelings of rejection, shame, and low self-worth.
It's a chain reaction.
Man, this is like if we can make a clip of this for the partners. If you're a man and your partner has ADHD, or you just don't know if they're neurodivergent or not, and you're just noticing like how hard life seems to be for them and you can't figure out why or what, like this is going to be also a really good resource for you because when we say it's not you, we mean it.
And the difference between being told or you overhear whatever, like, yeah, she's just on her period. This is just yeah, or those comments of like, Jesus, are you about to start your period? Not necessary, not helpful.
Yeah.
You think it's miserable for you? Please think about how I'm feeling. It is uncontrollable and absolutely miserable. So
yeah.
I'm curious how many neurodivergent people also don't go and get properly diagnosed for things like this because we think people are going to think we're crazy.
Well, it's not only that, but it's also every time you go to the doctor, especially if you're going to your gynecologist, any problem that you have, they're just like, oh, you have PCOS, here's birth control.
Yep.
See, I have diagnosed endometriosis, but I'm pretty sure that I have PMDD. I will go through, it's the only time I ever go through what I would consider depressive bouts anymore. I spent the first 2 days of this last cycle in bed, like, no, I don't, it hurts more. I am highly emotional and I'm a pretty regulated person most of the time. I will cry at fucking McDonald's commercials for the 5 minutes
Dude.
my period. Like, the fuck is wrong with me?
Yeah.
I have been crying. So 46% of ADHD women have PMDD. Someone go ahead and just guess the number of how many autistic women have PMDD.
I'm gonna say like
67.
Way higher.
70%.
82.
92%. Almost all of y'all have freaking PMDD.
Apparently I've got PMDD. How about that?
Insane. Only 8% of autistic women do not have PMDD.
Holy
That's crazy.
shit.
Yeah, that is
And
crazy.
I just got diagnosed. Welcome to the channel, y'all.
Yeah. I would write you a script, but PMDD was only considered an actual disorder in 2013. And I will find that article. 2013. People.
Okay, well, you also have to remember that like it was not that long ago that women were just prescribed freaking like Quaaludes, you know,
Yeah.
for like
Lobotomy.
It wasn't that long. It wasn't
for just for having hysteria, you know, like come
Dude,
on.
it wasn't that long ago that women couldn't wear pants to their sales job.
Yeah.
Ladies, raise your hand if you would have been lobotomized in the 40s.
Are you kidding? They would have thrown
I
me
probably
out.
would have voluntarily done it. I would have been like, okay, like, let's try it out. Like, if you think it'll work, like,
somebody help.
I'll be forward thinking for someone else. Like,
Yeah.
We were just allowed to get like a bank account in the 80s, y'all.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Dude, I remember
my mom was like in
mortgage.
her 20s. I was like,
remember reading One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in like 2nd grade or 3rd grade or whatever. I like read it really early on, and I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, like I would 100% end up like this way.
dude, I would have been in so much trouble. Like, I just think about like, because I remember my mom putting on her like changing into her snow boots with her tights and her hose and her skirts like for work, and then changing into her like day shoes when she's at work. And I'm like, why wouldn't you just wear pants and like boots when it's snowing? She's like, we weren't allowed to wear pants. And I'm like, wow. So I really do need to be grateful for the way that was paved.
yeah, thank you, athleisure gods.
So I can dress like this every day. Yeah.
All right, so that'll move us. Speaking of big thank you to all of the histories, and I don't know where I was just going with that. But I'm moving into the data dump now. Welcome to my brain. History, that's where I was going. Speaking of history, Brittany, you're gonna enlighten us today. It's Brittany's first data dump. Y'all get some pens and papers because this girl's got the biggest brain in the room.
No.
Yeah.
That's you.
Grab your pens and papers, big words. Get ready.
Okay. I went down a few rabbit holes in the process of this. So I'm going to keep it to the very basic part, and then we can explore the rabbit holes in the future, because I already know that like education and like societal infrastructure is probably going to be like a staple of the conversations that we have. That's how my brain works. So I'm always like, I'm interested in like, what is the seed and then what's the big picture? So I don't remember why we even started talking about this. Oh, it was because the last time we were talking about like experiences in school and stuff like that too. But okay, so obviously like historically, schooling was not actually meant for like literacy and things like that. Schooling was always like religious, right? So it wasn't until basically like the 1600s that there was any sort of like formal education. So like in colonial America, right, like 1600s and 1700s, they only had like dame schools where basically they would teach like home ec, essentially like domestic skills and like basic literacy to women. And basic literacy was always taught with the intention of like, you have to be able to read the Bible. And so 1647, this was wild. In 1647, there was like the first education law essentially that was passed, and it was called the Old Deluder Satan Act. Okay. It was passed in Massachusetts and it required towns with 50 or more families to establish a school. So that was the first time that like public education was like made to be a legal statute of any kind in like colonial America. And then obviously like the point of that was in order to establish basic literacy so that you were able to read the Bible. So even from its inception in some ways, like school was always meant to be some sort of like, infrastructure in order to like ingrain what you want the populace to think, right? So it's
Social programming.
yeah, social programming and and it's like again, not some big conspiracy. It's just like, hey, like, the Bible is important and God is important and like that's why they literally called it the old Deluder Satan Act. Deluder, like to delude Satan. In order to delude Satan in our communities, we have to establish basic literacy so that people can read the Bible, right? So I thought that was wild, but of course it was in Massachusetts. Like I'm not shocked at all. And then it wasn't until like the 18th century, so like the late 1700s, that's when grammar schools actually started to emerge. And that was in some colonies, and basically it was like preparing boys for higher education, teaching like it was more like classical education, but at the time it was like Enlightenment ideas. So it was like old philosophers like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, like all these like classical and Enlightenment philosophers, and it was those ideas that actually were like infiltrating the schools and the education system because the focus was on like reason and scientific inquiry and like individualism. And the whole point was to establish this moral, ethical, critical thinking populace that was able to engage in democracy and able to engage in society in a positive way, and developing like rational moral individuals, basically, so that you can function and contribute to a well-informed society. That was the point. Okay. What changed? The Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
The
We need
Industrial
workers.
Revolution. So in 1760-ish is like when the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain, right? So then obviously it came to the Americas, to the United States, and this is like one of those things where it's just like one decision after another, and it comes down to just like influence and funding. So the the Enlightenment era, when those ideas were permeating the schools, it was very child focused. So it was experiential learning, natural development. So it was like, learning through play, through creativity, through critical thinking, through reasoning, through engaging, right? And then all of that changed. So when the Industrial Revolution began, that sorry, I lost my spot here. I just want to get the dates. So that was like the late 18th century through to the 19th century. And now your needs shift. So now instead of the basic need being like, okay, we need a critical thinking population that's going to contribute to society, that's going to make sure that democracy works, right? Because now, America had a little bit of time under its belt, at least in like a colonial sense, you know? And so now you need factory workers. Like now you need people to actually man like the factories, and it went from like hand skilled labor to machine labor. So just the needs of society switched. Because it's like now you have all of the basic fundamental substructure of society in place. You have, at that time you had after like the American Revolution and everything, you had the laws that were established and everything. So you had that like basic substructure. You had like communities established, you had all that. So now it's like, okay, now we have to produce. So it was basically a complete 180. So it switched from a child-centered approach to a teacher-centered approach. And that obviously is like you have that, and I think Morgan, you touched on this earlier, where like now the teacher is the main authority, like all eyes on the teacher. And now it's about delivering content for memorization for the masses. So now you're imprinting education rather than allowing education to be a process through which everyone reaches their own conclusions and figures out how to think instead of what to.
Programming.
But the cool part about this is like, so obviously, as usual, like, it's always like the people who have the money that make the most influence, that have the most influence. So who were the leading industrialists of like the Industrial Revolution? Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford, J.P. Morgan, like Cornelius Vanderbilt. And a lot of these people, like that was genuine like philanthropy. I mean, there's institutions, especially educational institutions to this day that were like funded, public libraries, like all of these things, like operas and excuse me, like basic resources and stuff, like public resources. So again, wasn't all bad, but these guys had their own personal agenda and they all thought a little bit differently. But for the most part, they all believed that education was one vital for societal progress, but they also believed that it was a means of social control. Especially Henry Ford, he was like way more on the social control part. And then like Carnegie was actually more of like he wanted the power of education to like reduce labor unrest through like education. And then like even like Vanderbilt also, he was like he believed in like discipline and structure. So a lot of this was just like the guys who had the money that were creating industry, they were the ones who were like, we value discipline and structure, and now we want, a populace that is able to
Come work for me.
follow
Yeah.
instructions,
They wanted to
obedience,
breed, they wanted the
discipline,
education
structure.
system to
Yeah.
breed employees.
Exactly. And that's the total opposite of what the Enlightenment era was, where it was like, okay, let's learn, let's create, let's play. So anyway, I want to end on this because I know we're running out of time. I want to end on this. I was listening to a podcast. Shout out Joe Rogan. Obviously, I was listening to his podcasts, but the guest was Brett Weinstein, who's one of my absolute favorite people to listen to. He's an evolutionary biologist. I think he's just absolutely brilliant. And it turns out I didn't know that he was neurodivergent. I could have guessed, but I didn't know. And he was talking to Joe, and they actually were talking about this, about like public schooling and how it's, meant to create employees. And so he was basically saying that he's like, it's not that I'm saying there's really anything good about having a learning disability, or neurodivergence or ADHD or whatever. But he said, and I quote, this is so badass. He says, not that I'm saying there's anything good about it or that learning disabilities have an advantage, but if it breaks your relationship to school, so school has less of an easy time programming you to be a cog, the more you have potential to be something other than a cog.
I remember
Shout
that.
out to Brett Weinstein.
Yeah.
What is cog? Cognitive?
No, cog like a
Yeah,
pawn.
cog in a
Like
wheel.
Your cog, yeah, a cog in a wheel. You're just
Okay, give me the quote one more time.
okay. Some of us folks with learning disabilities have an advantage. If it breaks your relationship to school so that school has less of an easy time programming you to be a cog, the more you have potential to be something other than a cog.
I think you posted that,
Wow.
Britt, didn't you?
Huh?
I think you posted that at one point, right?
No, Brett Weinstein, just listened to this podcast a couple days ago, and they just so happened
For
to
some
hit
reason I remember you. I've seen that quote before, but like it's literally the people that are questioning school.
It's I don't remember the episode number, but if you go to Joe Rogan's podcasts, and it's his most recent one with Brett, because Brett's been on there a bunch of times, but it's around the 1 hour and 24-minute mark. So that you can kind of scoot back a little bit and they get into this education stuff. It was really, really good. But I love Brett. So that was cool. Shout out Brett and Joe.
Great job, Brittany. That was so fun
Thank
to
you.
learn about.
That was awesome.
I like I said, I spiraled off into so many different directions, like so many different directions. So I've been more where this came from, but I didn't realize that some of these folks were real good dudes. Did you know like John D. Rockefeller actually believed that like he like one of his goals was to create a more educated population so that their labor force was like more educated, because labor unrest was like a massive thing, like all the unionizing and everything else. They're like, no, long hours, shitty conditions, like fuck you, like basically, and so a lot of these like industrialists didn't want like an educated populace that was able to organize around labor. And some of these guys were like, no, education is important for, social mobility and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's crazy. I'm done. Sorry.
No, I love it. Zero
Loved
apologies.
it.
Stop that. So my brain is now going off into, because I'm dealing with school age children right now, and I'm just like, it's infuriating to me to watch the program. It's social programming, just to see it happening in real time. And to think,
One of the things I
all
did
because
also
we were
learn,
industrious.
though, was that there seems to be a little bit of an attempt to I don't know about course correct, but like there's more of like a progressive movement in education now, it seems. Even with little like things like Montessori schools,
Yeah.
and things like that. So it's like not just and obviously here again it comes down to like funding and resources, because like it's hard enough to even like people can't even afford to put their kids in daycare, let alone like a Montessori school, and then it comes down to like your resources and what your availability is for your education for your kids. But even if you learn this kind of stuff on your own and you teach your kids a little bit, let them play in dirt and like experience things and get them a freaking, what are those ant houses or what, like what
Ant
farms? Yeah, like nobody has an ant farm, they just have iPads now. Like go play in dirt.
That's weird. Yeah.
Like burn an
Play in
ant
the
with a
dirt.
magnifying glass, figure it out, like
All right, y'all. So we're gonna end this on a not so great note. Sorry to transition into the bummer. However, I think we all agreed on this on our prep call. This is going to be a very important piece to these conversations moving forward. So in our share your spectrum, we're going to talk about how they're not all good days, right? And something happened to me the other day that kind of spurred me wanting to get onto this topic. But I was talking to a young lady and she's like, "You're not autistic." And like, it took me a second because I immediately went to, you could not survive 24 hours in my head, was what I immediately went to, which is that isn't, because they don't know what they don't know. Right. And I realized, yeah, it probably does not seem that way to you because every interaction we've ever had has been in a social situation, and I mask like a motherfucker. So yeah, you probably have no clue what it is in this head, so I actually want to start this with some very, these are going to be some of the most shocking statistics we've had on here so far.
Is masking just the act of pretend, like intentionally and consciously keeping yourself together?
It's not intentional. A masking is usually, at least not at this point in my life, because I've been high masking forever. And for most women, we are high masking, and that's why we don't get diagnosed earlier. But really what it is, and this is the way I think about it, is this is a computer. And when I have to be in social situations where I have fear of being labeled as weird or different or etc., I immediately run a program in my head that's like, act like a human.exe. Literally, like I'm going to act like I will immediately step into this is what feels socially safe in this environment. And that is it's like, you see these funny memes all the time about like, "Oh, I like your personality." Autistic person, thanks, it's yours. I am literally just mirroring you right now so that you don't hate me or alienate me or cast me aside. And it's not an intentional thing. It is
or to close this deal.
Right. Yeah. It's whatever to get you through your day without,
which is literally what I feel like
alienated from the general populace.
I gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm gonna start with the ADHD. These are some stats for Americans based on the help that we get medically for these types of diagnoses. So for ADHD people, individuals with ADHD are 3 to 5 times more likely to die by suicide compared to those without ADHD. We're just going to start there. Self-harm. Estimates suggest that 13 to 45% of adolescents engage in self-harming behaviors, with higher prevalence observed amongst those with ADHD. This is like neurodivergent kids in general. It's 13 to 45%. The higher portion of those are children with ADHD. Studies have found that 42% of autistic individuals engage in self-harming behaviors their entire life. And just so everybody knows, that doesn't necessarily mean physical harm. That can also mean getting drunk when you can't deal with your emotional space. It can mean a lot of undiagnosed people do self-medicate with all different kinds of drugs. So it really does lean into that. Over 35% of children, this one hurts me a little. Over 35% of children aged 8 or younger with autism diagnosis have expressed a desire to end their own life. 35% of children 8 years or younger. That is a kindergarten to second grade age child. Suicidal ideation and attempts. Approximately 42% of autistic adults reported experiencing suicidal thoughts in the last year, and 18% reported suicide attempts. This indicates that autistic adults are 25 times more likely to attempt suicide than a non-autistic adult.
Wow.
How is this not common knowledge? And how are there not support systems in place for this? Because I'm a diagnosed autistic adult, and yesterday was the first time that I read those statistics. I can tell you that I am in those statistics as an adolescent and as an adult. And I will tell you that I think the majority of the reason that I'm in those statistics as an adult is because I had such a hard time getting properly diagnosed. I think that when they over-medicate people that are not diagnosed with autistic yet, it causes chemical imbalances too.
Oh, yeah.
That could be its own separate thing too.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
There's
I'm gonna
no
do some deep dive.
biological free lunch. I
And
believe
you
that's
know-
an Andrew Huberman quote, and I use it all the time.
This is another, the odds of you having a friend, a sibling, a partner that is neurodivergent is insanely high. And so again, please educate yourself. This neurodivergence is not quirky. It's not cute. It's not funny. It is a serious thing that happens in the most important part of our body, in our brain, that is something is off, and it affects every single thing that we do. And we do not have the option to cure it. We do not have the option to turn it off. It is with us, and it is activated all day, every day, from birth to the day that we die. And so it is so important to acknowledge the dark sides of these disorders. It is, it's extremely difficult. Lindsay just mentioned people out there wanting to kill themselves because they don't know how to live with the way that their brain functions. So if I could just, again, ask people to please be aware, please educate yourself, because the odds of you being close to someone who is autistic, who has ADHD, who is anxious, depressed, OCD, whatever it is probably somewhere around 100%. You have someone in your circle that is dealing with something like this. So, and if anybody out there who's listening to this and this topic has made you feel emotional because you have gone through it, or because you know someone who has gone through it, your life is so worth living. That is why we are on this podcast. That is why we are talking to you. That is why we have joined together and we are trying to reach the masses. We see you. We love you. We feel you. It is okay. You are okay. And you are so amazing. And you were given this brain because you can handle it. We can handle it together. There are resources out there. Do not ever take your life. Your life is so worth it. Please, reach out to us, please. Our handles are on here, and we will talk to you. We will hold your hand and we will lift you up. Even if you just want to chat and we just need to listen, we will do that too. You are not alone in this.
We don't mind a good yap.
Yeah, absolutely. You're important and your life is worth living. And that statistic is staggering. Holy shit.
Yeah. Not many
Sorry,
people.
went off on a little tangent.
So, I think everybody needed to hear that. Everybody out there needed to hear.
Phew.
So
Yeah.
I want to wrap it with, oh, go ahead, Britt.
Oh, no, I was just gonna add to that, like the amount of times that probably someone who's like really like on a bad day, right? Like it's not always like that, you know. But on a bad day, like the amount of effort that it takes for like basic tasks, like
Mhm.
I had myself a little mentee bee last night, so fresh content, I suppose. But it was like it seemed like out of nowhere almost, you know, and then kind of boiled down to like the things that were overwhelming me. And the thing that I
Mhm.
said to my husband last night, which was kind of the first time I put it that way, but it made a lot of sense, was like it feels like I am running a Windows 95 dial-up program and I'm trying to mine Bitcoin with it. Like
Wow.
I feel like basic tasks like take me so much longer than they need to. And then
Mhm.
and I'm a super like self-aware person. And so I like notice that and I'm like, it makes me feel dumb. Like
Mhm.
I feel like the level of executive dysfunction that I struggle with on a daily basis. And like like I said, some days are fine, some
Mhm.
days are not fine. But the level of executive dysfunction, like that leads to us being really, really hard on ourselves. And
Mhm.
it's like I know that someone who's like neurotypical or whatever might think like just don't just like don't think about it or like why are you thinking about that? And it's
Or
like
like just do the task. It's just laundry.
yeah, it's like we'll
Just
just do one thing and then
Yeah.
finish the task and then do the other thing. And I'm like standing in the kitchen with like the water running, all the cupboards are open, the dishwasher's open, and then I like go into the other room. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, like no, like neurotypical people have like a very A to B like task solution or like, you know, there's a reason I can't complete this task right now. Here is how I will circle back to it. Here's the reason I can't do it. Like whatever, no big deal. I feel like sometimes I'll get stuck on like the most inconsequential, smallest parts of a task, you know? Like sometimes I'll just like loop about a, a highlighter, like not having the right tool or whatever, you know? And it just like sends you into this loop. And then you just start thinking about all the other things that are like simple
Yeah.
tasks that you have to do that you haven't done that like
Mhm.
whatever, you know, and it's so frustrating and it's like so demoralizing. You're just like, I'm not dumb. I'm excited. I feel creative, but
Yeah.
like getting things from here out into fruition, like the what do you call it? Like the execution, you know?
yeah.
That's the part. That's why they call it executive dysfunction.
Mhm.
Like that part, at least for me personally, dude, oh my gosh. Like
And
I
it's
literally was just breaking down last night. I was like, I can't do things. Things are not being done. Why? Why can't I do
and
things?
and the spiral to that making you be like, think of all the other times you couldn't get it done and that you're super hard on yourself. That's so relatable. Like,
So
and in that
annoying.
book that I read, the year I met my brain, she talks about something that I've never heard anyone talk about, but I think about a lot, is being the ADHD mother in a household or wife in a household. And it's like, I you see the trad wife or these perfect wives on Instagram who have their shit together. Watch me get organized my entire refrigerator. Watch me restock my cabinet. And you're like, what the fuck? I am not like that. And the moms just run the household. And
Mm.
we are gonna have a very hard time doing that, which,
Mhm.
that's another topic. It's important who we marry because we're gonna need extra help, but so relatable. So
Yeah.
it's overwhelming. And my sister is neurotypical. She is extremely clean and organized. And I about had a panic attack the other day because she showed up to my house about 2 hours earlier than she was supposed to, and I had not cleaned up yet. And she immediately is like, "You live like this?" And it's not even dirty, it's just a little bit messy. But she just does not understand that I need a boost of energy before I can do that.
Yeah.
I can't just get
No,
up and do it.
you can't listen. I can't do anything, especially if it's like a menial household task, unless I'm like a little cracked out.
and blaring music and in the right mood and wearing the right sweatshirt.
Balls deep in a podcast, just so you know, the sun has to be shining just so.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the birds have to be chirping just so, and then I'll have
Which I don't think there's
else on
anything.
that day's to-do list, and then I'll be like, no, today is the day I'm cleaning the house because today is the day I feel like it, you know, and then get pushed back all the other like tasks that I was supposed to do.
Right
And
there.
now we're back to why can't you just do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it and then move on to the next task? Ta-da.
Ta-da. What, Morgan?
I forgot what I was gonna say because
Dude, that's been my life the last 3
Yesterday
days.
was a hard day.
All right, y'all. Well, hate to end on a sad note, but next time you guys like, there's two things I just want to say. It's incredibly rare that you meet somebody that says that they're autistic and they're not actually autistic. 90% of disabilities are invisible. And while I don't consider myself disabled, I do know that I battle an entire universe that the people outside of me cannot see me battling. So, to back on what Shay said, and just to support everybody out there, it always gets better. There's going to be bad days. Everybody has bad days. Unfortunately, ours feel a little heavier. So if you need help lifting yourself or people around you that are having bad days, please reach out. You've got 4 very capable women here and the ability to contact each of us directly. Y'all are not doing this alone. Welcome to the SOS network. We actually, for those of you who've been on the YouTube channel page itself, we are the SOS network. If you need help, let us know.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Till next week,
Bye,
y'all.
guys. And please don't tell people they don't have what they tell you they have. That's not appropriate. Love you.
And don't tell them to just shut it off.
oh
Yeah.
god.
It doesn't work.
What did we?
Real quick,
Can't.
let me see you do a tism real quick. Love you guys. Till next week.
Yeah, I gotta.